God is warning you about a person whose name starts with the initial J. The name is Don't Skip. What if a specific name just crossed your mind the moment you read this title, and that instant recognition wasn't actually coincidence at all? What if you've been quietly explaining away a feeling about this exact person for weeks, maybe months, telling yourself you're overthinking, when your own intuition has actually been trying to protect you the entire time? I need you to actually pause here, because if a name starting with that letter came to mind immediately, before you even finished reading, that reaction deserves your full attention tonight. You've probably felt this before, that quiet unease around a specific person, a tension you can't fully explain with hard evidence, just an instinct that something isn't quite right, even while everyone else around you seems completely comfortable with them. And because you can't point to one obvious, undeniable reason, you've probably talked yourself out of that feeling more than once, assuming you're being unfair, overly sensitive, or simply imagining things that aren't really there. Have you been dismissing an unexplainable unease around someone specific simply because you couldn't point to one obvious, concrete reason for it? Why your body often registers something before your mind can fully explain it. Here's something worth understanding clearly. Your intuition doesn't wait for complete, logical proof before it starts sending you signals. It processes small, often unconscious details, a slight inconsistency in someone's story, a subtle shift in their tone when certain topics come up, a pattern of behavior your conscious mind hasn't fully connected yet. That processing happens faster and more thoroughly than your logical mind can always keep pace with, which is exactly why the feeling often arrives before the explanation does. Have you ever sensed something was wrong with a specific person long before you could actually articulate what it was? Why you've been making excuses for this person specifically? Here's something worth examining honestly. Think about how many times you've quietly defended or explained away this person's behavior, even to yourself, without anyone else asking you to. They're just going through something. I probably misunderstood. They didn't mean it like that. That specific pattern of repeated excuse-making is worth noticing because it often reveals exactly how much you already sense, even while you're actively working to talk yourself out of trusting it. How many times have you quietly made excuses for this specific person's behavior without anyone else even asking you to? Why this warning isn't about condemning someone, it's about protecting you. Here's something important worth clarifying immediately. This message isn't asking you to judge, condemn, or write off another human being entirely. People are complicated, capable of growth, capable of change. This warning is specifically about protecting your own well-being, your own peace, your own boundaries in this current relationship or interaction, regardless of what that person's overall character ultimately turns out to be. Can you receive this as protection for your own well-being rather than as a permanent judgment against someone else's entire character? If this is landing somewhere real in you, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now because part 2 goes even deeper into exactly what to actually do with this warning. Why the specific details of their story often shift when you're paying close attention. Here's something worth watching for specifically. Pay attention to whether the specific details of this person's stories change subtly over time. Small inconsistencies that don't quite match what they told you previously, explanations that shift depending on who's listening. Those inconsistencies individually might seem minor. Accumulated over time, they often reveal a much clearer picture than any single conversation could show you on its own. Have you noticed small inconsistencies in this person's stories accumulating over time, details that don't quite match what they told you before? Why their reaction to being questioned reveals more than their original explanation. Here's something worth understanding clearly. Pay closer attention to how this person responds when you ask a simple, fair, clarifying question than to their original explanation itself. Someone with nothing to hide typically responds to reasonable questions with patience and openness. Someone hiding something often responds with disproportionate defensiveness, deflection, or even turning the conversation around to make you feel guilty for asking in the first place. How has this specific person responded when you've asked simple, fair questions, with patience or with disproportionate defensiveness? Why you don't need full proof before you're allowed to protect yourself. Here's something worth releasing tonight. The belief that you need complete, undeniable, courtroom-level proof before you're allowed to create distance, set boundaries, or trust your own discomfort around this specific person. Protecting your own peace doesn't require you to build an airtight case first. It simply requires you to honor what you've already genuinely sensed, even while the full picture might still be forming. Are you waiting for complete, undeniable proof before allowing yourself to protect your own peace around this person? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because part 2 continues exploring exactly how to set healthy boundaries without needing to confront or accuse anyone directly. Why this warning might also be asking you to examine your own pattern of ignoring red flags. Here's something worth considering with real honesty. Sometimes a warning like this isn't only about the specific person involved. It's also inviting you to examine a broader pattern in your own life. A tendency to override your own instincts repeatedly, to give people more chances than genuine wisdom would suggest, to prioritize keeping the peace over protecting your own well-being. If this pattern feels familiar, that's worth addressing directly, regardless of how this specific situation ultimately unfolds. Does this situation reveal a broader pattern in your own life of consistently overriding your own instincts to keep the peace? Truth for tonight. If a specific name came to mind the moment you read this title, that reaction deserves your genuine attention rather than immediate dismissal. Your intuition has likely been processing signals your conscious mind hasn't fully articulated yet, and the pattern of excuses you've been quietly making might be exactly the evidence you've been overlooking. You don't need complete proof to begin protecting your own peace. If you finally trusted what you've already been sensing about this specific person, without needing complete proof first, what would you actually do differently starting today? You've been quietly dismissing an unease around someone specific, explaining it away, giving them the benefit of the doubt again and again, even as small inconsistencies kept accumulating. Tonight, you're being asked to finally pay attention to what you've already been sensing, without needing complete proof before you're allowed to protect yourself. This is only part 1. Part 2 goes deeper into exactly how to set healthy boundaries around this situation without confrontation or accusation. If this message reached something real in you tonight, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because part 2 continues exactly where this left off. Trust what you've already sensed. You were never overreacting. God is warning you about a person whose name starts with. In part 1, we talked about the unease you've been dismissing, the excuses you've been quietly making, and why you don't need complete proof before you're allowed to trust what you've already sensed. So today, let's go further. How do you actually protect yourself in this situation practically without needing to confront, accuse, or dramatically cut someone off before you're genuinely ready to? Because knowing something feels wrong is one thing. Knowing how to respond wisely is where this becomes real. Are you ready to learn exactly how to protect your peace? Here's what tends to happen even after someone finally acknowledges their own discomfort around a specific person. They feel stuck between two extremes, either continuing exactly as before, pretending nothing feels off, or dramatically confronting and cutting the person off entirely, a response that feels disproportionate when you don't yet have a clear, specific reason to justify it. That stuck feeling caught between two uncomfortable extremes can leave you paralyzed, doing nothing at all. Have you felt stuck between pretending everything is fine and dramatically confronting someone, unsure of any middle path between those two extremes? Why quiet distance is often wiser than direct confrontation. Here's something worth understanding. Clearly, you don't need to confront this person directly, explain your feelings, or demand answers in order to protect yourself. Quiet, gradual distance, sharing less, being less available, keeping conversations more surface level is often a wiser, more sustainable response than direct confrontation, especially while your own understanding of the situation is still forming. Could you begin creating quiet, gradual distance from this person without needing to confront or explain anything directly? Why you don't owe this person a detailed explanation for your changed behavior. Here's something worth releasing immediately. The belief that you owe this person a full, detailed explanation for why you're suddenly less available, less open, less willing to share personal details with them. You're allowed to simply become more private, more measured, more selective, without justifying that shift to anyone, including the specific person this shift is actually about. Are you waiting to feel like you owe this person an explanation before you're allowed to simply become more private around them? Why limiting what you share protects you more than you realize. Here's something practical worth understanding. One of the most effective quiet forms of protection available to you is simply limiting the personal information, plans, and vulnerabilities you share with this specific person going forward. Whatever concerns you, whether it's how they use information, how they influence situations, or how they respond under pressure, becomes far less able to affect you when they simply have less access to your inner life. What specific information or vulnerability have you been sharing with this person that you could begin limiting starting now? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because more of these truths are waiting for whenever your next season needs this kind of practical protection. Why watching their consistency over time matters more than judging any single moment. Here's something worth practicing intentionally moving forward. Rather than reacting strongly to any single incident, watch this person's consistency over an extended period of time. Do concerning patterns repeat? Or was your initial unease actually connected to a specific, isolated situation that genuinely resolved? Time reveals patterns that any single moment cannot fully show you, and that patient observation protects you from both premature dismissal and premature overreaction. Are you willing to watch this person's consistency over time, rather than making a final judgment based on any single incident alone? Why involving one trusted person can help you see this more clearly. Here's something practical worth doing. If you haven't already, share what you've been sensing with one genuinely trusted person in your life. Not to gossip or spread suspicion, but to get honest, outside perspective on whether what you're describing sounds like a genuine pattern worth taking seriously, or whether it might be colored by something else entirely: stress, past experiences, or unrelated anxiety. Trusted outside perspective often catches blind spots your own closeness to the situation might be creating. Is there someone genuinely trusted you could talk to honestly about what you've been sensing to help you see this more clearly? Why protecting yourself doesn't require you to become cold or suspicious of everyone else. Here's something important worth clarifying as you move through this process. Protecting yourself specifically from this one situation doesn't require you to become generally cold, suspicious, or closed off toward everyone else in your life. This is about discernment specific to this particular relationship, not a wholesale shift in how you approach connection and trust more broadly. Keep your heart open to genuine relationships while remaining wisely protective in this specific one. Can you protect yourself specifically in this one relationship without letting that caution bleed into how you approach everyone else in your life? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because more of these truths are waiting for whenever your next chapter needs this kind of balanced wisdom. Why your peace matters more than this person's comfort with your new boundaries. Here's something worth holding on to firmly as you move forward. If this person notices your new distance and reacts with discomfort, confusion, or even pushback, That reaction doesn't obligate you to explain yourself or return to how things were before. Your own peace and protection matter more than managing their comfort with a boundary you have every right to hold, regardless of how they personally feel about it. Are you prepared to hold this boundary even if it makes this person visibly uncomfortable or confused? Truth for today. Protecting yourself in this situation doesn't require dramatic confrontation or complete proof. It requires quiet, gradual distance, limited sharing, patient observation of consistency over time, and honest conversation with someone you genuinely trust. Your peace matters more than this person's comfort with the boundaries you're finally choosing to hold. If you began quietly implementing these protections starting today, how much lighter do you believe you'd feel within just a few weeks? You've learned something today that moves this warning from vague unease into practical protection, that quiet distance is often wiser than confrontation, that limiting what you share protects you more than you realize, and that your peace matters more than managing anyone else's comfort with your new boundaries. Stay observant, stay protected. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing your own peace. If this message reached something real in you today, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because more of these messages are coming exactly when you need them most. Protect your peace quietly. You've already sensed enough to begin. What if the exact timing of this warning, arriving now, before anything irreversible has actually happened, is itself the clearest evidence of how deeply you're loved? What if a warning that came too late would have been far crueler than silence? And the fact that you're hearing this right now, while there's still time to respond wisely, is genuinely one of the most tender gifts you've been given this entire year. Tonight, we close this journey by understanding not just what you've been warned about, but why the timing of that warning matters more than almost anything else we've discussed. You've probably wondered, at some point across this journey, why this warning arrived now, specifically, rather than earlier, before you'd already invested time, trust, and emotional energy into this relationship. That wondering can carry a specific frustration, wishing you'd known sooner, wishing you could have avoided the discomfort entirely, wishing the warning had arrived before you'd already given this person as much access to your life as you have. Have you wished this warning had arrived earlier, before you'd already invested significant time and trust into this specific relationship? Why a warning that arrives before devastation is always mercy, even when it feels late. Here's something worth understanding clearly. Regardless of how much time has already passed, this warning arrived before complete devastation occurred, before irreversible damage was done, before the situation reached a point where recovery would have been significantly harder. That timing, whatever frustration it carries, is genuine mercy. The alternative, no warning at all, or a warning arriving only after everything had already fallen apart completely, would have cost you far more. Can you recognize this timing as genuine mercy, even if part of you wishes it had arrived even earlier than it did? Why late warnings tend to arrive as devastating revelation rather than gentle guidance. Here's something worth understanding about how this specific kind of situation typically plays out when warning arrives too late. Instead of a quiet, internal unease you have time to examine and respond to wisely. The truth arrives as sudden, devastating revelation, discovered evidence, a painful confrontation, a betrayal fully exposed after significant damage has already been done. That version of learning the truth costs infinitely more than the version you're actually experiencing right now. Can you imagine how much more devastating this situation could have become had the truth only arrived after significant damage was already done? Why this early warning gives you something late warnings never offer: the ability to respond with dignity. Here's something worth appreciating specifically about this exact timing. Because this warning arrived early, you have the ability to respond with genuine dignity, quiet, wise protection, thoughtful boundaries, patient observation, rather than the reactive, devastated response that typically accompanies discovering betrayal only after significant harm has occurred. That dignity, the ability to handle this situation calmly rather than in crisis, is a genuine gift this specific timing has made possible. How has the early timing of this warning allowed you to respond with more dignity and calm than a late discovery ever could have? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because more of these truths are waiting for whenever your next season needs this kind of grounded perspective. Why God's warnings often arrive as whispers rather than dramatic announcements. Here's something worth understanding about the specific nature of how this warning likely arrived in your own life. It probably wasn't a dramatic, undeniable event. It was more likely a quiet, persistent unease, a subtle discomfort you almost dismissed multiple times before finally paying attention. That quiet, whisper-like quality isn't a lesser form of warning. It's actually the most common, most consistent way genuine guidance tends to reach people, gentle enough to be ignored, but persistent enough to eventually be heard by anyone genuinely listening. Did this warning arrive to you as a quiet, persistent whisper rather than a dramatic, undeniable event? Why ignoring this specific mercy would cost you more than the discomfort of receiving it? Here's something worth being honest about as this journey nears its close. The discomfort of receiving this warning, having to examine an uncomfortable possibility about someone in your life, having to implement quiet boundaries, having to sit with uncertainty, is genuinely smaller than the cost of ignoring this specific mercy entirely and allowing the situation to develop without any protective response at all. The temporary discomfort of heeding this warning protects you from a significantly larger cost down the road. Does the temporary discomfort of heeding this warning feel worth it compared to the potential cost of ignoring it entirely? Why this mercy reveals something specific about how much you're actually watched over. Here's something worth receiving with genuine comfort tonight. The fact that this specific warning reached you at exactly this moment before devastating consequences occurred reveals something deeply personal about how closely and specifically your life is actually being watched over. This wasn't generic impersonal guidance. It was specific, timed precisely for your exact situation, arriving exactly when you needed it most. Does it change how you feel about your own life, realizing how specifically and personally this warning was actually timed for your exact situation? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever your next chapter needs this kind of personal, specific care. Why you can now trust future warnings with greater confidence, having witnessed this one's mercy. Here's something worth carrying forward as this entire journey concludes. Having walked through this experience, recognized this warning's mercy, and responded wisely rather than ignoring it, you're now equipped with genuine, personal evidence that future warnings, whenever they arrive in your life, deserve the same genuine attention and trust. This experience becomes a permanent reference point for every future moment where quiet unease tries to reach you again. How will this specific experience change how quickly and confidently you respond to future warnings in your own life? The final truth. This warning arrived exactly when it needed to, before devastating consequences occurred, before recovery would have been significantly harder, giving you the ability to respond with dignity rather than crisis. That specific timing wasn't accidental. It was mercy, personal and precise, revealing exactly how closely your life continues to be watched over, even in the quiet, ordinary moments where unease first begins to whisper. If you fully receive this entire experience as genuine mercy, rather than frustrating inconvenience, how would that change the way you carry gratitude forward into whatever comes next? Series finale. You've walked through this entire 5-part journey, from the moment a specific name first crossed your mind, through learning to trust unexplainable unease, through practical protection, through honest self-examination, and now, finally, understanding why this warning's exact timing was genuine mercy rather than mere coincidence. You weren't warned too late. You were warned exactly on time. If this series meant something real to you, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because there's always another message waiting for exactly the moment you need it most, and this channel isn't finished showing up for you yet. Mercy arrived on time. Now walk forward, protected and grateful.